Thank you, Deputy President. I rise tonight to speak about the ongoing human rights and legal crisis being experienced by the Australian journalist Julian Assange. Mr Assange has been the subject of a witch hunt by the United States over WikiLeaks' involvement in the leaking of material detailing horrific war crimes committed by US forces in Afghanistan and Iraq in 2010. In 2019, Mr Assange was indicted on 17 charges related to the publishing of leaked material under the contentious US Espionage Act. Publishers from mainstream media outlets, such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, who, like Mr Assange, published leaked material obtained from whistleblower Chelsea Manning, have not faced similar charges. Ms Manning herself was released from prison in 2017 after serving 7 years in relation to the leaked material. Mr Assange is the only person involved in the exposure of these war crimes by the US military who continues to be pursued by the US government. This is despite Mr Assange being an Australian citizen who published the material outside of the US. In doing this, the US has shown a complete disregard for Australian sovereignty and the rights of Australian citizens. Last June, I spoke in this place in support of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese as he expressed the government's dissatisfaction with the excessive infringement on Mr Assange's liberties, sharing the view held by many Australians that the US ought to drop their case against Mr Assange and allow him to return home. In a motion passed by the Federal Parliament this February, MPs urged both the United States and the United Kingdom to finally conclude this matter so that Mr Assange may be allowed to return to Australia after years spent in a legal limbo fighting extradition to the US. Throughout his confinement, Mr Assange's mental health has severely deteriorated. In 2019, the UN Special Rapporteur on torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment concluded that his treatment constituted psychological torture. Legal professionals involved in Mr Assange's case have stated multiple times that he will not survive extradition. If Mr Assange is indeed extradited to the US, he will face a sentence of up to 175 years imprisonment. He has, of course, already served 12 years in de facto imprisonment, just awaiting a resolution to the United States extradition attempts, more than served by Ms Manning for leaking the subject material in the first place. Recently, when asked by an American journalist to respond to Australia's request for Mr Assange's release, the United States President Joe Biden announced that they were considering the request. It's extremely encouraging to hear that Australia's calls for justice are beginning to resonate in Washington. President Biden's remarks are a noteworthy first step in putting an end to the procedural injustice that Mr Assange has suffered for over a decade. This ongoing legal saga has demonstrated a gross neglect of Mr Assange's human rights. The actions of the United States also raise serious questions about the level of protection for Australia and global journalists who may be at risk of extensive, damaging legal campaigns akin to the one that's currently being waged against Mr Assange. As one of Mr Assange's lawyers, Barry Pollack, argued, it sets a frightening precedent for all journalists that they too are at risk of being locked up just for doing their job. It is well and truly time for this to come to an end. It is time to bring Mr Assange back home to Australia.